And you can make better decisions about, and more informed decisions for yourself in your prep time about where to get that minute back if you know those things. And that'll be more important even when you're the negative. You want to know how much time the affirmative spent on the arguments you made, and you want to know how much time you spent making them too. You almost want to know that I spent 2.5 on the disad, they spent 2 minutes, they probably have enough ink here. If their arguments aren't very good, that might change your calculus, but if they're decent arguments, that probably means you're not going to go for the disad. And so knowing those kind of things is going to help you a lot make better decisions. So that means, though, that in prep time, that's another thing in prep time you have to do. And so being able to multitask and take care of these things, because in prep time, you should have a strategy coming out of prep time and made a conscious decision of where you're going to get that time back. It shouldn't be like, oh, I guess I'll have to get it back somewhere. Like, you shouldn't be going into your speech not knowing where you're going to try to get that back. You should have a strat. If you don't get it back there and make a mistake or get stuck on something, you know, that happens sometimes. Like, sometimes you just get stuck on an argument, can't get off of it, even though you're planning on spending a little bit of time, less time there to make some time back. That might happen. But you should at least go in with the intention and the plan of where you want to get that time back. Maybe you don't always execute, but I mean, then you'll probably lose. Like, lack of execution means you lose. That's just the way debate is. And almost being affirmative, I think, if you make the right decisions and make that time up, you almost can't lose. Like, that's what I almost feel like half the time being affirmative is just playing catch up. Just force the negative into choosing the wrong arguments. The only way you can force the negative to choose the wrong arguments is by covering all of them well. If you don't cover all of them well, then their decision is made really easy. And now they can punish you in their next speech and make extremely good use of time of the 6-3 split. And so as the affirmative, if you do a good job in that 6-7, 7-6 split, you make their decisions much more difficult, because the negative has to also use their prep time and watch their clock as to make their decisions, what am I going to go for? And if you do a good job covering the 7-6, now you're ahead in the debate, because they don't have good choices to make. They don't have good outs to go for in the debate round. And we'll talk about what the negative can do to make it harder on the affirmative to make up that minute when we get to what the negative should be doing with the time skew. The other thing you should do then to become more efficient, and another thing you can do, is you should group arguments. And you should think about and make conscious decisions before you get up there on what arguments to group. Some of you have learned how to flow or watched other people flow, see people drawing a line next to arguments sometimes to group things. Like, that's something you should be doing as you flow, is if you notice there are a lot of claims that are really similar, you should draw a line next to them to remind yourself when you speak that those arguments can be answered as a group. They don't have to be answered one by one, and that will help you save some time. You should also look for arguments that share the same internal link. If there's arguments that are based on the same assumption, or share the same internal link, or dovetail from each other, then probably a good way to save time is front load your arguments on the internal link and concede a little bit on the impacts. They have to win their internal link to get to their impacts. And if you're way behind on the time skew and need to catch up, that's a good way to catch up, is that you can group these two arguments together that may not appear as though they go together, and point out that they share an internal link, or they all kind of stem from the same argument. They have to win this argument here to access either of the disads. Then just win that argument there really hard. Don't give them access to the two forks they've built to go with their two different impacts, and just win the internal link debate, or win the link debate, or whatever argument they share. Just beat them there at the nexus. And so you take out 2 birds with 1 stone, so the saying goes. Looking for those kind of arguments and being good at identifying, you also can think of those arguments as when you build an arch, the stone at the top is like a keystone or whatever, like keystone arguments or linchpin arguments that a lot of their strategy kind of results from winning this one argument. Sometimes it's an inevitability claim, like they have to win that it's inevitable. If they win that X is inevitable, the rest of their strategy falls into place. If they don't win that it's inevitable, then they're in trouble. And you can front load all of your arguments against their entry point argument, or their keystone or linchpin, or whatever metaphor you want to use. The best debaters in the country always know what those arguments are. They can tell right away. They can tell as you're reading your 1NC, and they can start pulling arguments and front load all their arguments against that entry point argument and just close the door for you for the whole debate. And if you're the other debater and don't realize that that's what they've done to you, you're just in big trouble too, because then you're like, they didn't answer my impact, extend my impacts, and they spend all of this time screwing themselves on their time skew because they didn't realize you've already defeated them at their entry point, and they're still trying to win the impacts of the debate, but are undercovering the 5 or 6 answers you put on the link, and spending, instead of answering all of your arguments on the link, they're still extending their impacts, or extending their internal links, or extending their uniqueness before they've even won the link debate. That seems bad for them. And so, being able to identify and practice identifying, if you watch a debate with friends, ask them, like, do you think it was the right choice to go for that argument? Which argument do you think was the most important for the negative to win? Ask each other those questions, and ask your coaches those questions if you watch them judge around on a panel, and really kind of come to a consensus and try to guess yourself first. Like, you should have an answer before you ask your coach. You should know what you thought the argument was, and then see if they said the same thing. And try to figure out what arguments were the places where you could have made up time, what arguments were the places you could have grouped, stuff like that. Now, we've talked about getting that minute back, but secretly this time skew's a little rougher than 7-6. Because if you're giving a good 1AR and a good rebuttal, like they talked about a little bit this morning, you're having overviews and underviews too. So that's even more time you have to get back. You got to get back, if you want 30 seconds for an underview and 15 seconds for an overview, that's another 45 seconds you have to get back. And you need to know before you stand up how much time you want to spend on underviews and overviews, because you also need to make that calculation for where you're going to get that time back too. So that's the secret, really, is that if you forget, if you're like, okay, I can make up that minute on the dis-ed, they read a shell that was way too long, and I have a sweet link card, like it's just, this debate is over on the dis-ed, and you make up your minute on the dis-ed, but then forget about your overviews, then you didn't do your job. You had to make up more time than you thought, and you forgot to do it. So that's a mistake that I've seen people make, and sometimes then they don't have time for their underview. And if you had planned an underview and didn't have time for it, usually those speeches sound so confusing because they were waiting to pull the strings back together at the bottom and waiting to give you a complete picture of their strategy and their argument, and then didn't get there. And now the speech sounds like they were just throwing a bunch of darts at a dartboard and hoping they hit a bullseye, because they never showed you how actually every dart was a bullseye, and here's how those arguments fit together, here's my interview for this debate, and why I'm way ahead, and why you're going to be voting for the affirmative. You need to make sure you win back enough time to make those arguments at the bottom, if you're especially if you're planning on doing that. And they're good arguments to make, like we talked about in the rebuttal. Actually, you want to clench your arguments together at the bottom, and you want to do that, and make sure you have a coherent strategy at the end of your speech, so the last thing the judge hears is exactly why you are winning the round at that point. Like, you want to end round speeches that way, and if you don't find the time to end that way, if you're ending at the bottom, being like, okay, now there are turns at the bottom, I think these turns are totally not unique, and then beep, 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 and then time goes out, like, what's the negative going to do? They're going to stand up, they're going to say, let's go to the turns to the bottom, right? Like, that's what they're going to do. Or they're going to be like, that speech had no focus, like, I don't really know what they're going for, like, I don't think they understand the grand strategy of the negative, and here's why the negative's way ahead in the debate. And their overview is going to make them sound in control of the debate, because you didn't have an underview to regain control of the debate. You sounded out of breath, and you were out of time at the end of your speech. So it's not just about that getting that minute back, it's also getting control back. And you can't get control back unless you are saving enough time to have an underview at the bottom and really have a full strategy for your speech. Some of the ways to do this, we already talked about, like with the efficiency and drills you can do to become more efficient, to group more, to find arguments, to share internal links. Another way is that you should do a really good job having an extensive affirmative back file. Like, your files should be as big as you can make them. Like, one of Lafayette's debaters last year, Beth Whaler, had an amazing start to the year because she started the year with one of the largest affirmative files, though certainly the largest one on our team, and one of the largest ones that I saw around the circuit last year, aside from maybe this, you guys' Bushmeat file was probably like 600 pages or something ridiculous, but that might be a little overkill. But her ag subs case at the beginning of the year, she just had everything blocked. She was getting time back on every argument because she was prepared for every argument. As the season progressed, if you don't keep up with what the negative's obviously not going to keep running into the same wall then. Like, if you have a great 1AR strategy against extra T, the negative either needs to change their shell, put some tricks in it, or come up with new arguments. And that means your files have to evolve throughout the year. You have to grow your back files, grow as many pre-prepped answers as you can. And when you have those, it doesn't